The cake still had candles on it when she slid the papers across the table and smiled at me like she was doing me a favor. It was my birthday. Balloons swayed in the warm summer breeze behind her head, red and yellow, the colors she had chosen herself 3 weeks ago when she was still pretending everything was fine. The family was gathered around the outdoor table, glasses of lemonade sweating in the heat, a fruit bowl catching the afternoon light. And there stood Nadia. Auburn hair perfectly curled, green blazer pressed and deliberate, blue eyes steady and unreadable, handing me a stack of papers with the calm composure of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in the mirror. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shaking, she was smiling. That was the part that broke something irreplaceable inside me. Not the papers, the smile. I remember the world going quiet. My mother's mouth fell open to my right. My father-in-law's face drained of color from across the table. My teenage niece pressed her fingers to her lips. Behind Nadia, her best friend Serena, who had been laughing just 30 seconds before, raised her hand as if she wanted to stop the moment, but didn't know how. Everyone froze, and I sat there holding a stack of divorce papers on my 34th birthday, staring at the woman I had loved for 9 years, wondering how we had gotten here. If you believe in second chances, in kindness, and in the quiet miracles that change everything, hit that like button right now, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story that moves you. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? My name is Marcus, and I need to tell you this story the way it actually happened. Not the clean version, not the version where I look like a saint, but the real version, the one that cost me everything before it gave me anything back. Nadia and I met in our mid-20s, both of us working late in the same office building. She was in marketing on the 4th floor, I was in finance on the 7th. We shared an elevator for 6 months before I found the courage to say anything beyond morning and have a good evening. She was the kind of woman who made ordinary moments feel significant. When she laughed at something genuinely funny, she laughed with her whole body. When she listened to you talk, she made you feel like you were the only person on earth. I fell in love with her slowly and then completely, the way water fills a glass, steady, quiet, and then suddenly full. We married on a crisp October afternoon, surrounded by exactly 40 people. No grand venue, no elaborate themes. She wore a simple ivory dress and carried wildflowers. I cried before she even reached the altar, and she teased me about it for years afterward. But every time she brought it up, she was smiling. That smile. The same smile that, 9 years later, she would use to hand me the end of everything. The trouble didn't announce itself loudly. It never does. It crept in through late nights at the office and missed dinners and conversations that slowly became shallower until one day I realized Nadia and I were living like polite roommates in our own home. I had thrown myself into a startup, a logistics company I had been building for 3 years, and I told myself that everything I was sacrificing in the short term was for us in the long term. The long term. That terrible, selfish phrase people use to justify neglecting the present. I kept saying I was doing it all for us, and I kept not asking her if she wanted it. She tried to tell me she was struggling. Not directly. Nadia was never the kind of person to announce her pain like a headline. She tried in the way she lingered in doorways after I said goodnight too quickly. In the way she would sometimes reach for my hand during a movie and I would be too absorbed in something on my phone to notice. In the way she stopped mentioning the trips she wanted to take, the dinners she used to plan, the small rituals that had held us together. She stopped, and I didn't notice the silence because I had filled it with work and ambition and the extraordinary human ability to miss what is right in front of you. By the time I looked up from everything I had been building, Nadia had already made her decision. She had been carrying the weight of our hollowed-out marriage alone for over a year, and she had simply exhausted herself trying to reach someone who kept moving further away. She had done what many people do when they finally stop hurting. She had gone quiet, organized her grief into paperwork, and found a way to close the door gently. The birthday party had been her mother's idea. I learned that later. Her mother, Dolores, had begged Nadia to wait. Just one more conversation, one more real attempt. Nadia had agreed to wait until after the birthday celebration. But she had brought the papers with her, tucked into the bag by her chair, and somewhere between the fruit bowl and the cake candles, she had decided that waiting any longer was its own kind of cruelty. She handed them to me with a smile, because she thought it was kinder than tears. She thought if she seemed composed, it would make it easier for me. That was Nadia. Even at the end, even while ending us, she was trying to protect me. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I held the papers and I looked at her and I thought about the elevator 6 months of mornings and I thought about wildflowers and I thought about how I had cried before she reached the altar. I thought about all the doorways she had lingered in. And then I excused myself from the table, and I walked to the far end of the garden, and I sat down in the grass against the fence, and I pressed my face into my hands, and I let the garden absorb whatever it is that leaves a man when the structure of his life collapses. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the party sounds to shift, the polite, uncomfortable shuffling, the hushed voices, the sound of chairs being moved. And then I heard footsteps through the grass. Not Nadia's. They were heavier, more hesitant. I looked up and saw Rowan. Rowan was Nadia's cousin. I had met him maybe 6 or 7 times over the years at family gatherings. A quiet, gentle man in his early 40s who worked as a landscape architect and largely kept to himself. He was not the type to insert himself into other people's business. He was the type to stand at the edges of parties, nursing a drink, observing, never performing. He sat down beside me in the grass without asking permission, without a preamble, without the expression of awkward pity I was dreading from everyone else. He just sat down, like it was the most natural thing in the world to sit beside a man falling apart in a garden on his birthday. He didn't offer comfort right away. He just sat with me in the quiet for a while, and I was grateful for that. Eventually, he spoke. He spoke carefully, the way someone speaks when they've been holding something for a long time and have finally found the right moment to set it down. What he told me next changed the entire shape of that night. Rowan told me that 6 months ago, he had been visiting Nadia to help her with some work on the garden she had been redesigning. While he was there, he had found her sitting at the kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon, not doing anything, just sitting, which had alarmed him because Nadia was never someone who sat idle. He had sat across from her and asked what was wrong, and for the first time in what she described as over a year of feeling invisible, someone had sat across from her and actually asked. She had broken down completely. Not about the marriage being over, about the specific, unbearable sadness of loving someone who had stopped seeing you. She had told Rowan things she hadn't told anyone else, that she didn't want it to end, that she was terrified it was too late, that she had tried to reach me in every quiet way she knew, and each attempt had met nothing but the wall of my absence. She had said, through tears, that she was filing the papers not because she didn't love me, but because she was out of ways to say that she did. She was filing them because she thought, at that point, that I simply didn't want to be reached. Rowan looked at me in that garden and said, very calmly, that he had been wrestling with whether to tell me any of this. He wasn't sure it was his place, but watching me walk away from that table alone, watching the look on my face when those papers landed in my hands, it wasn't the look of someone who didn't care. It was the look of someone who had just understood all at once exactly what he had lost and exactly how it had happened. And Rowan decided that the truth was more important than staying in his lane. He told me something else too, something that Nadia would later confirm. The week before this party, she had written me a letter. A long, honest, painful letter. Not asking me to fight for the marriage, not making demands. Just telling me the truth of her experience so that at least I would understand whatever happened next. She had rewritten it 4 times. She had ultimately decided not to give it to me because she didn't want it to seem like manipulation. Didn't want it to feel like she was manufacturing emotion to change a decision she had made rationally. She had folded it up and left it in the drawer of her nightstand where, as Rowan told me, It still was. I stood up from the grass. I don't fully remember making the decision. I remember standing up, and I remember walking back across the garden, and I remember Nadia watching me come toward her with an expression I had not seen on her face in years. Not the composed, soft smile she had used to hand me the papers, but something more exposed, something that looked like fear and hope living in the same breath. I asked her, not loudly, not dramatically, not in front of everyone, if we could go inside for a moment. She nodded. We left the stunned silence of the patio and walked through the back door of the house and stood in the kitchen in the quiet, and I told her that Rowan had spoken to me. I watched her face move through about 6 different emotions in 4 seconds. She looked at the floor. I told her I wasn't angry. I wasn't there to argue or to beg. I told her that I had heard what she said through Rowan, and I needed her to know that I understood it, that I believed it, that I recognized myself in every word of it, the absent husband, the person who had loved her while looking through her, the man who kept promising a future while dismantling the present. I told her about the letter I hadn't known about, and I asked her if I could read it. Not to use it against her, not to change her mind with it, but because she had written it for me to understand, and I wanted to understand. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked to the nightstand and came back with 4 folded pages covered in her handwriting, and she placed them in my hands without a word. I read it standing in that kitchen while she sat at the table and waited. It took me a long time. When I finished, I sat down across from her, the same way Rowan had once sat across from her at this very table. And I looked at her and I said, with everything I had, that I was sorry. Not the reflexive apology of someone caught, the real kind, the kind that comes from actually seeing what you've done and feeling the full weight of it. The kind that doesn't ask for anything back. We talked for 2 hours. The family outside gradually realized what was happening and gave us the grace of space. We talked about the years, about what we had been to each other and what we had stopped being, about the specific night I had missed dinner for the 3rd time and she had eaten alone and said nothing because she had already run out of ways to say something, about the elevator and the wildflowers and the way I had cried before she reached the altar. We did not fix everything in that kitchen. I want to be clear about that because this is a real story and real things are not fixed in single conversations. We did not come out of that room with everything mended. We came out of that room with something more valuable, the truth, fully seen by both of us for the first time in years. The divorce papers did not get signed that night. By mutual agreement, we decided to try. Not blindly, not out of guilt or fear, but out of the genuine recognition that what existed between us was not gone. It had been buried under the weight of my absence, and it was worth excavating if we were both willing to do the work. We went to counseling. It was difficult. There were sessions that left us both exhausted and raw. There were nights I drove home from those sessions wondering if we were fooling ourselves. But there were also nights I drove home and found Nadia in the kitchen, and she looked up at me when I walked in, really looked at me. And the way she looked felt like the elevator all over again. Rowan came to our first anniversary dinner after the reconciliation. I pulled him aside before dessert, and I told him that whatever he had decided in that garden when he weighed whether or not to tell me the truth, I needed him to know that it had mattered, that it had been the hinge of everything. He nodded and looked slightly uncomfortable with the gratitude, which was so completely Rowan that I almost laughed. Sometimes the thing that saves you doesn't come loudly. It doesn't come wrapped in the language of heroism or miracle. It comes as a quiet man sitting down beside you in the grass and deciding that the truth is worth the discomfort of speaking it. It comes as a letter in a nightstand that almost stayed folded. It comes as the space between what you almost lost and what you choose, finally, to see. Before you go, if this story reached something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love or a moment you nearly let slip away, please leave a like on this video and share it with one person who needs to hear it today. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people who are searching for exactly this kind of story. There is one more thing I want to say before I close this story. After everything, after the counseling and the hard conversations and the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding, I asked Nadia once why she had smiled when she handed me those papers. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that she had smiled because she was trying not to cry. Because if she had let herself cry, she would have taken them back before they ever reached my hands. She had been holding the door open even while handing me the key to close it. Special request: drop a single word in the comments right now that describes how this story made you feel. Just one word. Let's see what this community is made of. We still have that birthday cake photo on the refrigerator. The one someone took right before everything stopped and changed. The candles are lit, the balloons are bright, Nadia is not in the frame, but I know she was there, on the other side of the table, holding pages that felt like an ending and were really the beginning of the only conversation that could have saved us. She smiled and gave me divorce papers on my birthday. And because of what her cousin told me in the garden that night, I finally understood why.